Ethan Vale's hands trembled slightly as he approached the control panel. The metal surface was cold beneath his fingers, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside his mind. The station corridors were empty, silent except for the distant hum of the life support systems. Outside, the alarms were wailing, a reminder of the chaos that had erupted just minutes ago. Everyone else had left, the scientists, the guards, even the few technicians he had worked with. They had all abandoned the Krillin diplomat Saris without a second thought, but Ethan couldn't leave. He couldn't. He glanced behind him. Saris was standing there almost statuesque, her silver eyes reflecting the dim emergency lights. She did not move, did not speak. Her gaze was calm, but there was a weight in it, as if she had seen every human flaw in an instant and somehow decided it didn't matter. Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to say something reassuring, but the words refused to come. Instead, he took a deep breath and pressed the lock sequence. The heavy metal door slid shut with a grinding sound that echoed through the empty hall. Then came the click, a precise, final sound that made Ethan flinch. He left his hand on the panel as if keeping contact would make the decision less real. He knew that outside this door, people would be coming back, not to rescue them but to enforce their orders, to make him regret his choice. He had no illusions about that. Finally, he turned to face her. He expected anger, maybe fear, perhaps even disbelief. But Saris said nothing. She just looked at him, eyes wide but steady, waiting. Waiting for judgment, waiting for understanding, waiting for the explanation he didn't know how to give. "You locked us in," she said softly. Her voice had a musical quality, even when speaking a language that was not her own. "Yes," Ethan replied, his own voice rough and uneven. "I did." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Her expression was unreadable, but in her silence, Ethan felt both the weight of her scrutiny and an unspoken trust. It was a strange, fragile thing, that trust, given so freely in a world where humans often assumed control, assumed superiority. But here she was, offering it anyway, without demand or expectation. "I trust you," she said quietly, and she did not ask him to stop. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had never had anyone trust him like that, not completely, not without reservation. All his life, he had been cautious, careful, aware of the limits of human kindness. But Saris saw something different in him. She saw the choice he had made, not because it was easy, not because it was ordered, but because he wanted to protect her. The alarms outside continued to scream, but inside the room there was a silence that was almost sacred. Ethan moved closer to her, still uncertain, still aware that every moment counted. He could feel the tension in the air, the invisible lines of threat pressing against them. But he also felt something else, a warmth, a reassurance that even in this cold, mechanical station, a human heart could make a difference. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan shook his head. "Because someone has to, because I can." Her eyes widened slightly at the simplicity of his answer. Krillins were not used to simple acts of humanity. Their society valued strength, power, and calculation above all else. To them, decisions were measured in outcomes, not in intentions. And yet here was a human standing firm in the face of fear, choosing care over convenience, compassion over obedience. Sarah studied him a long moment longer, and then she stepped back, just enough to give him space but close enough to show she was staying. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words, but for the first time since her capture, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they could survive this. Perhaps they could prove that humanity's strength was not in weapons or orders, but in the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous, even when no one asked. Ethan pressed a hand to the cool metal of the door again. He felt the weight of the lock, of the decision, of the trust given to him by someone from a species that had every reason to doubt humans. And yet, in that moment, he realized that trust was more powerful than fear. It was stronger than steel. And somehow, it felt like the first step toward something greater. He looked at her one last time before turning back to the panel. Outside, the world was dangerous, unyielding, and loud. But inside, there was something worth protecting, something that made the risk worth taking, something worth staying for. And Saris, the alien diplomat, did not ask him to stop. Ethan leaned against the wall, letting the hum of the station fill the quiet spaces around him. Outside, the alarm screamed relentlessly, a harsh reminder that danger had not left them. Every corridor echoed with emptiness. Every flickering light emphasized the abandonment they had endured. The other humans had fled, following orders, leaving the Krillin diplomat, Saris, alone in a place designed for control and observation. But Ethan could not leave. He had never been able to abandon someone in need, and now, as he looked at her calm, silver eyes, he knew he never would. Saris watched him quietly, head tilted in that alien way, observing everything and understanding more than she let on. Her species had strength, speed, and intelligence far beyond humans, but Ethan realized that she had never experienced simple loyalty, not like this. Humans acted unpredictably, guided by feelings and empathy. That was something Krillins did not fully understand. Their society valued efficiency and dominance, and leaving someone behind was normal, expected even. But Ethan had chosen differently, and that choice had meaning. "They didn't care about me," Saris finally said, her voice soft but tinged with hurt. "The others, they treated me like a problem to be solved, not a person to be protected." Ethan shook his head. "They didn't see you, they didn't care to see you, but I do." Her eyes searched his face, trying to find a flaw, a hidden motive, a reason to doubt him. But she found none. Only a human standing there, exhausted and anxious yet determined. The kind of determination that was quiet but unshakable, the kind that didn't need recognition or reward. She had expected cruelty, betrayal, manipulation. Instead, she had found courage wrapped in compassion, a combination her species rarely understood. Ethan moved closer, keeping a careful distance, aware of the tension between them. "When they come back," he said quietly, "they won't come to help. They'll come to take control, to make sure everything happens their way." Saris's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why lock the door? Why stay here when it's dangerous?" He took a deep breath. "Because someone has to. Someone has to stand between you and them. Someone has to make the choice to protect, even if it's hard, even if it costs me everything." She blinked, and for a moment she seemed almost vulnerable, a rare sight for a Krillin diplomat. "Your people, you humans, you are strange. You risk yourself without orders, without reward. Why?" Ethan shrugged, trying to appear casual, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Maybe it's because we can. Maybe because we feel. Maybe because it's the right thing to do, even when no one asks." Sarah studied him, absorbing every word. Her species measured strength in results, in power and control. But Ethan's strength was different. It was quiet. It was patient. It was steady, unwavering even under fear and pressure. And somehow it scared her more than weapons ever could. The station shuddered suddenly, a distant explosion making the walls vibrate. Dust fell from the ceiling, and Ethan grabbed her arm instinctively, steadying her. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. Instead, she let him guide her to a safer corner. The simple act, unremarkable to an outside observer, carried a weight far beyond comprehension. Protection, choice, care. Human traits that Krillins rarely valued, yet now mattered more than all the technology in the station. Hours passed in silence. Ethan rationed what little supplies remained, offered her warmth, and kept her away from the unstable equipment. She began to observe him more closely, noticing the small, seemingly insignificant acts, the way he checked the panel for power fluctuations, the way he made sure she had the better side of the room to rest, the way he stayed awake, alert, even when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. Each gesture spoke volumes in a language Saris was only beginning to understand, a language of humanity. "You don't leave," she said at one point, almost as an accusation. "I can't," Ethan answered simply. "Not when I know what's waiting outside for you, not when I can do something to change it." For the first time since she had arrived on this station, Saris felt something unfamiliar, hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for understanding, for connection, for a glimpse of a species that could choose compassion over command, loyalty over fear. She had seen power used to control, to dominate, to punish. Now she saw it used to protect, and it was more terrifying and more beautiful than anything she had ever known. And as the alarms continued their relentless wail outside, Saris realized that staying here, with a human who had no obligation to her, might be her only chance not just to survive, but to see a new kind of strength emerge. Ethan locked eyes with her, hands still trembling slightly from the effort of standing vigilant, and she understood. He was here because he chose to be. And for the first time, she didn't ask him to stop. Ethan paced the small room, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. Outside, the alarms continued their harsh, relentless warning, but inside, the silence was almost sacred. Saris watched him carefully, her silver eyes reflecting the dim emergency lights. She had been through much in her life: negotiations, confrontations, political games, but never had she seen a human act like this. A human who stayed, not because of duty or fear, but because of choice. "You do not understand," she said softly. "Your people are unpredictable." Ethan stopped packing and looked at her. "That's true," he said. "We are unpredictable, but sometimes that's a good thing." Her head tilted slightly. She had learned quickly that human decisions were not always logical, not always calculated. Krillin's valued results, efficiency, survival. Humans valued something else, something Saris could not yet name, something that made her uneasy and curious all at once. Ethan set down a small container of rations on the floor. He pushed it toward her, gesturing for her to eat first. "You'll need your strength," he said quietly, "and I'll manage." She hesitated. In her culture, it was customary to refuse first, to assert independence, to show strength. But she didn't. She trusted him. Slowly she began to eat, her movements deliberate, careful. She watched him all the while, noticing the way he checked the room for danger, the way he kept his posture ready yet relaxed. The contrast confused her. Strength without aggression. Protection without expectation. Ethan's own hunger gnawed at him, but he ignored it. He thought about the people who had left, who had abandoned her, who had measured her worth like a statistic. And he thought about why he stayed. Not for recognition, not for orders, but because no one else had done it, because someone had to. And that someone, he realized, could be him. Hours passed. The station's lights flickered, warning of unstable power. Ethan found a way to rig a small emergency generator, his hands moving quickly but carefully. Saris watched him work, noting the precision of his movements, the patience in his touch. She had expected fear, panic, maybe hesitation, but all she saw was calm determination. "Why do you do this?" she asked, almost whispering. Ethan looked at her, exhausted but steady. "Because I can, because someone has to care, because it's right." Her silver eyes widened. In Krillin culture, the right choice was the one that ensured survival or power. Compassion for its own sake was rare and almost foreign. Yet here he was, demonstrating it with every action. Feeding her, protecting her, staying awake while she slept. Acting without demand, without reward, simply because it mattered to him. "I do not understand humans," she admitted. "Your decisions, they are confusing." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good. Confusion can be a strength. It keeps others from predicting you, from controlling you. Sometimes it makes them see things differently, makes them reconsider what they thought they knew." She watched him closely, the way he moved with care, how he assessed risks and chose paths not because they were easiest, but because they were right. She had never considered that there was power in choosing kindness, that there was courage in patience. That strength could be measured not by force or command, but by the willingness to protect someone else, even at your own risk. When the first tremor hit the station walls, both of them stumbled. Ethan grabbed her arm instinctively, steadying her. She looked at him, and for the first time she did not question his motives. She had already seen them clearer than any report, any observation. Humans acted differently. They risked for the sake of another. They stayed, even when leaving would be easier. They chose care over convenience. "You stay," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "even when no one asks." Ethan nodded. Someone has to. And in that moment, Saris realized something she could not have learned from any report or study. Humans were dangerous, not because of their weapons or their technology or their politics, but because they could choose to act differently, unpredictably, morally, even when the world demanded otherwise. She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, not in command, not in expectation, but as acknowledgement, a silent gesture of understanding. And for the first time, Ethan felt that their temporary sanctuary, small and fragile as it was, had become more than just a hiding place. It was proof that humanity could be brave, compassionate, and steadfast, even when no one asked them to be. Saris did not ask him to stop. The station's emergency lights flickered again, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. Outside, distant voices carried through the metal corridors, sharp and commanding. Ethan knew they were back. Not for rescue, not for negotiation, not for fairness. They had returned to enforce control, to ensure everything followed their rules. The weight of the decision he had made pressed on him like a physical force. Sarah stood silently beside him, watching him work at the control panel. She had followed Ethan's every move for hours, noting how he rationed their limited resources, how he kept the emergency generator running, how he stayed awake while she rested. Every action, small as it seemed, revealed a human instinct she had never truly seen before. Patience, courage, moral choice. And now the test of those instincts had arrived. A message flashed on the monitor, breaking the tension in the room. Command override available. Door access granted. Ethan stared at it, his fingers hovering over the keys. This was the moment of truth. He could open the door, step back into safety, and follow the protocol that every human in the station had abandoned long ago. Or he could stay, defy the system, and protect the one person who had been left behind. Saris looked at him calmly. Her silver eyes reflected no fear, only observation. "You can leave," she said quietly. "I will not stop you. No one would blame you for stepping aside now." Ethan's chest tightened. He had thought about this moment countless times during the long hours of isolation, but now, with the reality pressing close, he felt the gravity more than ever. "I locked the door for a reason," he said, voice steady but low. "Not to trap you, to give you time to survive." She stepped closer, curiosity and caution intertwined in her gaze. "Time for what?" Ethan looked at her, measuring his words carefully. "Time for them to see that we're not enemies, that humans can choose differently, that strength can be measured not by domination, but by protection." Her expression softened, but her question lingered. "And if they don't see it?" Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the tension ripple through him like a current. "Then I'll stay anyway, because leaving would mean letting fear and power dictate everything. And I can't do that. Not to you." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the alarm seemed to fade for a moment, replaced by the quiet hum of life support and the weight of human choice. Saris observed him, seeing the conviction in his eyes, the determination in his stance. In her culture, strength was about victory, dominance, and control. Humans measured it differently. By courage, by empathy, by the ability to risk themselves for another. And now, in this quiet room with the door locked and the world waiting outside, she understood it firsthand. A sudden tremor shook the station, rattling the panels on the wall. Ethan reached out instinctively, steadying her, and she allowed him. It was a simple, unremarkable act, but to Saris it was a revelation. Humans didn't just act for themselves, they acted for others, even when it was dangerous, even when no one asked, even when the consequences were uncertain. "Your choice, it is unlike anything I have seen," she whispered. Ethan nodded, but he did not waver. He had made his decision, and now every moment counted. Outside, the voices grew louder, approaching. Orders barked into comms, warnings shouted. But inside, Ethan and Saris were in a world of their own creation, a space defined not by rules, not by fear, but by trust, empathy, and courage. "You stay," Sarah said finally, her voice firm, almost commanding in its quiet way, "even when it is dangerous." Ethan looked at her, a faint smile forming on his face. "Someone has to, and I chose you." She studied him for a long moment, realizing the depth of his choice. The Krillin code of survival emphasized strategy and strength, yet here was a human proving that true power could also be moral, selfless, and courageous. He had made the choice that could change everything, not just for them, but for anyone who might witness it. And as the first shadows of the approaching figures appeared under the flickering lights, Ethan knew that, whether they understood it or not, the truth of humanity's courage had already begun to speak. Saris did not ask him to stop. The pounding on the door was louder this time, reverberating through the small room like the heartbeat of the station itself. Ethan pressed his back against the wall, his hands steady despite the adrenaline thrumming through his veins. Outside, the voices were sharper, more aggressive. Commands shouted over the comms, demanding that he unlock the door. "Ethan Vale, open this door immediately," one voice barked. Saris remained calm beside him, her eyes fixed on him as if she could draw strength from his presence. She had watched humans act unpredictably before, but this was different. This was a choice against authority, against fear, against the expected. Ethan had stayed. He had protected her, and now the consequences were knocking, literally, on their sanctuary. "They're not coming to help," Ethan said softly, more to himself than to her. "They're coming to control, to force. They'll take you back even if it kills trust between us." Saris tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Then what do we do?" Ethan exhaled slowly, thinking about every lesson humans had learned over centuries, lessons of courage, patience, and resilience. He didn't answer immediately. He could have run, could have unlocked the door and followed protocol. But he didn't. He realized something important. Sometimes staying, refusing to yield, was stronger than any weapon. "They'll learn eventually," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Humans, we don't always need to fight to show strength. Sometimes we wait, sometimes we protect, sometimes we stand." The next impact rattled the panels again. Dust fell from the ceiling, scattering across the floor. Ethan stepped in front of Saris instinctively, shielding her with his body. The act was instinctual, simple, but it carried meaning. Protection without expectation, courage without demand, morality without reward. Every movement was a testament to human resilience. Outside, the voices rose into a chorus of frustration and disbelief. "He's just human," one of them shouted. "You can't reason with him." Ethan smiled faintly at the absurdity of it. Yes, he was just human. But humans had always been unpredictable. They had always survived because of something deeper than technology or training. They had empathy, the ability to act against fear, the willingness to stay when no one else would. And that unpredictability now worked in his favor. Saris watched him closely. She had studied humans for months, analyzing their strategies, their logic, their weaknesses. But she had never understood the real source of their power until now. It wasn't in orders, it wasn't in guns or shields, it was in choice. Choice to care, to stay, to protect, even when it seemed impossible. The pounding slowed for a moment, replaced by whispered comms. Someone was trying to assess him, to negotiate, but Ethan didn't flinch. "She is under my protection," he said into the communicator, his voice calm and unwavering. "You will not touch her, not now, not ever while I am here." Silence followed. Confusion. Frustration. They were not used to humans refusing without fear, refusing without hesitation, refusing without need for reward. And that silence gave him the upper hand. Saris took a cautious step forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "You risk everything," she said softly. "For me, for nothing." Ethan shook his head. "It's not nothing, you matter, that's enough." Time stretched. Each second felt heavy, yet every moment reinforced what she had already realized. Humans were more than their weapons, more than their rules. They could be courageous in ways no one anticipated. They could protect others when survival seemed impossible. And sometimes that courage was all it took to change the world around them. Finally, the pounding stopped. The voices outside grew distant, leaving only the hum of the station and the faint smell of dust and ozone. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaustion catching up to him, and Saris remained by his side, silently acknowledging the choice he had made. In that quiet, fragile moment, she understood completely. Human strength was not in their force, their weapons, or their orders. It was in their courage to stand, to protect, to choose right over easy. And Ethan had just proven it. She did not ask him to stop. The station was quiet now, the alarms long silenced and the distant echoes of human authority fading into the metal corridors. Ethan sank onto the floor, back against the wall, his chest rising and falling as he tried to calm the rhythm of his racing heartbeat. He was tired, every muscle aching from hours of vigilance, yet a strange satisfaction filled him. He had protected Saris. He had stayed when everyone else had run. And he had chosen to act according to his conscience, not command. Saris remained standing, observing him with her silver eyes wide and thoughtful. Her species had seen strength measured in dominance, in control, in the ability to command fear. But what she had witnessed here, in these long, tense hours, was something different, something foreign, something she had never considered as true power. "You risked yourself," she said finally, her voice soft but deliberate, "for someone not your own." Ethan shook his head and let out a tired laugh. "You're not my own. You're someone who needed help, that's all it takes." Her gaze lingered on him. In Krillin society, such acts would be considered foolish, weak, inefficient. Yet here in the quiet of this damaged station she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, respect, awe, and something deeper, understanding. Humans had a way of acting that could not be predicted, explained, or measured. They acted because they chose to, not because they had to. "You do not understand," she said softly. "Your kind, your decisions, they are confusing." Ethan gave a small smile. "Good. Confusion can be useful. Sometimes it keeps others from controlling you. Sometimes it makes them see things differently. Sometimes it shows them what's possible." She stepped closer, cautiously, almost reverently, as if approaching a rare artifact she didn't want to break. She studied him, noting every detail, the exhaustion in his shoulders, the faint tremor in his hands, the determination in his eyes. Every part of him was human, yet every action carried a lesson she had not anticipated. Humans were brave in ways Krillins could not predict. They stayed when it was easier to run. They acted without orders. They protected without reward. "Why," she asked finally, "why do you do this? Why risk yourself for me, for nothing, for compassion?" Ethan looked at her, his tired eyes steady. "Because it matters, because it's right, because someone has to. Not everyone can choose that, but we can." Her silver eyes widened slightly. She tried to measure it, to understand the logic, the calculation behind his actions, but there was none. That was the point. His strength was not in power, not in weapons, not in orders. His strength was in choice, in empathy, in courage. It was human. It was terrifying, and yet it was beautiful. Hours passed in silence. Saris watched him tend to the small emergency generator, check the room's temperature, and prepare their next ration of food. Every movement was deliberate, careful, and patient. She noticed how he anticipated problems before they happened, how he never demanded recognition, how he always placed her safety before his own. "You stay awake while I sleep," she said, more statement than question. "You endure hunger, fatigue, danger without complaint. Why?" Ethan shrugged lightly, sitting down beside her. "Because someone has to, because someone should, because no one else did." For the first time, Saris felt hope. Not the fragile hope of survival, but the stronger hope that humans could be more than what her reports had described. They could choose courage over fear, compassion over obedience, and strength over cruelty. She had been prepared for neglect, for fear, for survival at any cost. Instead, she found care, moral courage, and unwavering protection. "You teach me something," she said quietly. "Something my kind does not value, something human." Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. Humans are strange, unpredictable. Sometimes we surprise even ourselves, but sometimes we surprise others too. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a silent gesture of acknowledgement, understanding, and trust. In that small room, in the quiet after the storm, she realized that strength was not just in dominance or force. It was in courage, in choice, in compassion. And humans had it in a way Krillins rarely, if ever, understood. She did not ask him to stop. The sound of the station's doors sliding open echoed like a distant promise. Ethan stood beside Saris, still alert, muscles tense from hours of vigilance. Outside, figures stepped cautiously into the room, diplomats, mediators, and finally, the higher command. The human voices were quieter this time, controlled, almost hesitant. It was as if the world had changed in the moments Ethan had stood firm. Sarah stepped forward, her movements deliberate, graceful, and fully her own. The calm that had settled over her face now carried something deeper, respect, recognition, and a sense of awe she rarely displayed. For the first time since she had been brought to the station, she felt free, not just from captivity, but from the expectation that power alone defined strength. Ethan's gaze followed her carefully. He had been through the hours of tension, the pounding on the door, the fear and uncertainty, but he had chosen to stay, to protect, to act as a human should when no one asked, when no one else would. And now the consequences of that choice were arriving, not as punishment but as recognition. The senior diplomat approached, bowing slightly in acknowledgement of the situation. "You acted against protocol," the diplomat said, voice measured, "yet you ensured her safety. Your courage is noted." Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on Saris. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was right." Sarah stepped closer to him. Her silver eyes glimmered in the dim light, reflecting a mixture of admiration and something almost unspoken, a bond forged through trust, courage, and shared danger. "In my culture," she said softly, what you did would be considered extraordinary. It is more than strength. It is the highest form of courage." Ethan smiled faintly, exhaustion lining his features. "It's what humans do. Sometimes, not always, but when it matters, we try." Outside, the comms crackled. Reports of Ethan's actions were spreading quickly. The other humans in the station, those who had abandoned their posts, now looked on with confusion, surprise, and a hint of shame. He had chosen compassion over convenience, courage over fear, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone that strength was not always measured by orders or dominance. Saris turned to the group of diplomats and officials. He could have left, he could have obeyed orders, but he chose differently. He stayed. He protected. He acted with courage that transcends protocol. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, not from praise, not from gratitude, but from the quiet acknowledgement of something he had always believed, that humanity's true power was in its choices, in its capacity to act morally and bravely, even when no one asked. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the senior diplomat nodded, signaling the others to stand down. Saris looked at Ethan, and for the first time there was no tension, no fear, only trust and understanding. "You locked a door," she said softly, her voice carrying weight, "and showed me a future I had never imagined. A future where humans are more than I expected, where courage comes from choice, not obligation." Ethan stepped back slightly, unsure of what to say. Words seemed inadequate for the weight of the moment. "I just did what I could," he said quietly. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that carried more emotion than any report, any ceremony, any protocol could express. "No, you did more than that. You reminded me that strength can be gentle, that courage can be moral, that humanity can inspire." The doors opened wider, and for the first time since the alarms had begun, the world felt calm. Outside, the stars twinkled faintly through the station's observation windows. Life, in its chaotic, unpredictable way, continued. But inside that small room, something extraordinary had happened. Humanity had revealed itself not through power, not through technology, not through control, but through courage, empathy, and moral choice. Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight of hours lift from his shoulders. Sarah stood beside him, her presence quiet but powerful, and in that moment he realized something profound. Humans were feared not for their weapons, not for their orders, not for their logic, but because when it mattered, they could choose compassion over convenience, courage over fear, and morality over command. And sometimes, that choice was enough to change everything. Sarah did not ask him to stop. And that was the greatest proof of all.